longitude and latitude, master astronomers.
At the hill of Uasneach, we met our lively, animated tour guide who told us all about the Druids and Celt clans and the tribal connections of the past. He brought to life with great expression and enthusiasm the importance of the place and its relevance at the time before Patrick and Roman Catholicism came to Ireland, when pagan religions were practiced. The original builders picked this site because 20 counties could be seen at its highest point. This is where the king of all the local clans positioned himself to claim his power. It was the spiritual center of Ireland, one of the most ancient sites of all times. This is where 5 provinces of Ireland met, and where the king would celebrate the Festival of Fires, which indicated the beginning of planting time after the winter. Our next spot took us to Long Crew Passage Tomb, which sits on the highest point in Meath, where we climbed a steep and slippery grassy hill to reach several large megalithic tombs that date back to the 4th millennium BC. That's 4,000 years before Jesus Christ walked on the earth. These tombs are built under huge mounds of earth, which enclose stone cairns to hold the dead. Intricate artwork called petroglyphs was carved on the inner walls. A cairn mound of stones, rough built as burial monuments, typically on a hilltop or skyline. Hence the height we climbed to get to these. The view from the top of the largest tomb was amazing. I could see a full 360 degrees with nothing in the way. We drove through the Irish countryside, viewing the lush, green, picturesque landscapes. In the town of Trim, we stopped to check out an impressive and well-preserved Anglo-Norman castle that was the administration center of all of Meath. Trim Castle is the largest castle of its type in Ireland. Over time, the castle was added to and improved and made the perfect stage for Mel Gibson's movie, Braveheart. Further down the road, we visited another sacred site of ancient Ireland, the Hill of Tara, another Neolithic burial site positioned high above the land with extensive views. Eventually, Christianity changed the country, and these mythological sites are the only thing that remains of the era. Many tales come from this time period that have hung in modern-day Ireland. It is said at this very place that Patrick challenged the kings of the land, and in turn, a meeting was held where he preached his faith to them, and it converted the entire country of Ireland over to Roman Catholicism. On this journey, we passed the town of Kell, where monks wrote what is known as the Book of Kells. While in Dublin, we walked past 6 statues honoring those who had died during the potato famine between 1845 into the early 1850s. I was told that it didn't have to happen, that it was brought on by landowners' greed and unsympathetic socially driven mores. The absentee landlords versus the peasants. This ship is a replica of what they called a coffin ship. It would help people emigrate away from Ireland, but almost 50% of the people died on these journeys. I was told that 8 ships of food were exported compared to 1 ship of imports. The potato blight started from a fungus that took over all of Ireland, finding the perfect breeding ground in the moist Irish landscape, hence propagating the destruction of the potato crop. Potatoes were the peasants' main food staple. The famine killed over 1 million people and forced 2 million to emigrate. Some Catholics viewed the crisis as divine punishment for the sins of the people, while others saw it as judgment against abusive landlords and middlemen. Peel, the Prime Minister of England, wanted to remove heavy tariffs on imported grains, which could have fed the starving Irish. But the English gentry and politicians were outraged at the idea of losing money on their English grain sales. Trinity College in Dublin is Ireland's most prestigious college and is Ireland's oldest surviving university. It was founded in 1592 by Queen Elizabeth and holds the same prestige as Oxford and Cambridge. The architecture on the campus characterizes the centuries of age and beauty. The Library of Trinity College is a legal deposit library for Ireland and Great Britain. All published books will find their way into this library. It contains over 6.2 million printed volumes and a significant quantity of manuscripts, including the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells is one of the greatest treasures of medieval Europe. It is an illuminated manuscript written in Latin containing the 4 Gospels of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It is a master work of Western calligraphy, employing decoration that is not only extraordinarily rich and colorful, but also in places deeply enigmatic. Built between 1712 and 1732, the main chamber of the old library is the Long Room. It is filled with over 200,000 of the library's oldest books and is one of the most impressive libraries in the world. The distinctive and beautiful barrel-vaulted ceiling was added in 1860 to allow space for more works. Lining the central walkway of the nearly 200-foot-long room are marble busts of famous philosophers and writers. The library includes a rare copy of the 1916 Proclamation of the Irish Republic. Malahide Castle was owned for almost 800 years by the Talbot family from 1185 to 1975. During that time, much turmoil occurred in the country, including siding with the Catholic Jacobites of Scotland and the 1690 Battle of Bayonne, when 14 members of the Talbot family lost their lives in a one-day battle. Despite this loss, the family still managed to keep its land and the castle. Sir John Talbot, known as Lord Furnivall, was immortalized in Shakespeare's play Henry V. The interior of the home dates back to the 1700s. Each piece of refurbished furniture is placed according to the way it would have been when the Talbots lived in the home. Dublin is Ireland's capital and largest city. It has a long history dating back to the 7th century, a Viking settlement, the Normans, and then the British to become a modern-day city that today houses some of the biggest companies like Facebook and Google. As we drove around the streets of Dublin, we saw many old churches, stately buildings, castle remnants, and of course monument after monument, and statues of Irish writers, poets, rebel leaders, and otherwise heroes of Irish history. Famous writer Oscar Wilde, born and raised in Dublin, has his own statue. The River Liffey separates the city into northern and southern parts, and is flanked on both sides with old and new buildings. This was the infrastructure centuries ago that brought commerce to the city. The Halfpenny Bridge that crosses the River Liffey was built in 1816, and they charged half a penny to cross, which is how it got its name. One can't go to Dublin, Ireland, and not try some of the Jameson whiskey, so we stopped at their distillery and checked out some things, and of course did a taste testing. We stopped at the Kilmainham Jail, which is now a museum, but in its day a notorious prison that was in operation between 1789 to 1924. Common men and women and children were held for all kinds of offenses like stealing food, murder, and rape. There was no segregation amongst the prisoners. Men, women, and children were all crammed into cells together. The Brits held many public executions in the jail in an attempt to threaten the Irish into submission. Irish and English languages are both spoken throughout Ireland, some areas speaking only Irish, or what is called Gaelic. That dates back thousands of years and is still required to learn in school. The evolution of languages is very involved. After a long day with a hop-on, hop-off bus through Dublin, we passed the Samuel Beckett Bridge. We headed back to our hotel for a good night's sleep because our official tour began the next day. This is a simple map of Ireland that displays the route that we took. The arrows lead you in the direction that we went. First, we stopped in Glendalough. Glendalough is home to one of the most important monastic sites in Ireland.
Glendalough, the valley of two lakes, sometimes somber, but always beautiful, is famous for its early Christian settlement founded by St. Kevin some 1400 years ago. With a round tower, crosses and churches, within whose walls sleep many Leinster kings, it is a felicitous combination of all aspects of an early Irish monastery. Yet Glendalough is only one of many such Irish foundations which stood out in the storm-tossed culture of 5th century Europe.
The monks that lived in Glendalough and other locations in Ireland hid themselves away from people and their temptations. They lived lives of devout servitude to God. These ruins are known for their round towers, the churches, the Celtic crosses, and the graveyard.
The Atlantic Ocean is just 7 miles to the south. We have gale force winds off the sea, on average 130 days of each year. But, despite the frequency of gale force winds, the water out there stays flat calm always. The hills provide the shelter. The Vikings realised this, they named the area Vedrar Fjord. Vedrar Fjord in medieval Norse, the language they spoke, means weather harbour. For 5 changes of language and 69 years pronunciation, Vedrar Fjord has slowly changed to Waterford.
At the House of Waterford Crystal Factory in Ireland, we watched artisans blow glass, shape glass, and break glass off of many different facets. From there, we watched them bake it in ovens. Then, once it was done baking, we watched them sand the glass so it was smooth. After this point, after sanding and buffing and polishing, where all the marks and imperfections were removed from the glass, it went to the next stage where it was marked, and then after the markings were all made symmetrically, they were carved by hand. Some were carved by hand, others were carved and finished by a machine, but for the most part they were all done by hand by these very aged and mature artisans who were very skilled in their practice of glass cutting and shaping. We even saw artisans doing very, very refined work. This fleur-de-lis was made for another object and being glued together. This was a helmet that was going to be used for a trophy, and then this globe was also a fine trophy. The work that they do takes a long time and it's a very expensive process, and this particular piece was made for the firemen that lost their lives in 9/11. We walked around the town for a little bit before retiring for the evening. Cork was the last port of call for the fated ship Titanic, and the last port of call for nearly 3 million Irish that emigrated from the country during the years of the famine in the mid-1800s. They ended up in countries around the world like the United States and Australia. We stood on the deck where the Titanic left port and viewed the remaining piers still standing yet broken, just near the White Star Line office where passengers would have purchased their ticket to their watery grave. We were told that the lifeboats on board the ship were not nearly full as they were cast away from the sinking ship. In fact, most of the lifeboats were empty. Apparently first-class people were not to mix with third class. Social standards of prejudice during this time in history played a role in the decisions that were made. The Blarney Castle has a long history, beginning in the 10th century. It got its name, Blarney Castle, after a comment that Queen Elizabeth made when she was told repeated lies from her generals. She asked them to take the castle, but they gave her multiple excuses, and she said, "That's Blarney." The owner of the castle was known to be very charming and get his way, which is why he was not able to be captured by the Queen's emissaries. This is in part how the castle got its name, Blarney, and also the Stone of Eloquence, or the eloquence of the man who dissuaded his captors. We climbed to the top of the castle, passing rooms and small cavities of cold stone and tight spaces that held imaginary ancient lives. I thought about the tapestries that may have hung from the walls and the smell of smoke that would have permeated each room and piece of cloth and wall hanging. We wound our way to the top of the stone spiral stairs to find the infamous Blarney Stone, or the Stone of Eloquence. You lie on these mats on your back and then tip back down over the outside and kiss this stone while being held by somebody at the top. This stone has been kissed by millions, if not billions, of people. So what is so special about this stone? Legend tells us that the builder of the third and final castle on this spot, Cormac McCarthy, was given this stone as a reward for supplying men in a battle of 1314. This stone is thought to be the Stone of Scone, or the Stone of Destiny. The Stone of Scone sits in Edinburgh Castle today, although some think it may be a fake, and the real stone is under the throne of England in Westminster Abbey. Who knows? This stone is the same stone that Jacob of the Bible used for a pillow, who while he slept saw angels descend and ascend to heaven. It has held great spiritual significance for that reason. After we left the Blarney Stone, we took a drive through the Irish countryside to Killarney. Killarney is one of the most commercialized towns that we were staying in. We stayed there for 2 nights. Tomorrow we see the Ring of Kerry and stay another night here in Killarney. But we had plenty to do at night when we got back, including shopping and also going to the local bars and listening to music. It was great fun. We left Killarney in the morning, and our first stop was the Wicklow Mountains, a very large mountain range on our way around the Ring of Kerry. This is an image sequence, or a time-lapse of images that I shot when we stopped along the Ring of Kerry. This is a panoramic view of Portmagee in Ireland, and it's very close to the Skellig Islands where the monks used to live. One of those islands, Skellig Michael, a rocky offshore island, was featured in one of the Star Wars films. On our way back to Killarney for our second night, we passed barren, rocky coastline, sheep, and really beautiful waters. The next day, we left Killarney and traveled to the River Shannon estuary and took the ferry ride across. From there, we traveled along the coast of County Clare. The beautiful scenery, lush green grasses, and rich quality of sparse rural living was a beautiful thing to see. Along the southwestern edge of Ireland, the Cliffs of Moher, sea cliffs, tower nearly 700 feet, jutting in and out along the coastline. We walked along the top of the cliffs to O'Brien's Tower, which took the place of a fort several years ago. From the tower, great views of Galloway Bay and the Aryan Islands abound. Here I used the drone to get some magnificent views of the cliffs. The cliff area can be very dangerous with very few barricades. Despite warnings to stay on the path, many have fallen into the sea from these great heights. We were once again amazed at the beautiful scenery as we drove to our next location. Such lush green. You hear about this, but it is so true. And when you see it, you're just brought this peaceful calm, despite the fact that Ireland has a very turbulent history. Multiple clearing of trees has left this area of Ireland desolate of earth, which has left this stony ground. By the end of the day, we made our way to Galloway, where we toured the old church and some ancient streets that dated back to Roman times. It was very rainy, so heading back to the hotel was greatly anticipated.
Right up in the northwest corner of Ireland now, if you can picture the map of Ireland, about 2/3 of the way up there's a horizontal ledge on the map of Ireland, and you're just above that now, right out on the coast. And you're looking northwest out across the Atlantic. Your next stop after me today with Tony is in County Donegal, which is the most northerly county along this west coast, and that's where you're looking. You're looking towards the Donegal Mountains, and you're going to travel through them with Tony today, just over towards the right hand side, right through the heart of some of the Donegal Mountains. Okay, the highest part of the mountain over there in the distance that the cloud is just covering at the minute is a place called Slieve League. I heard Tony mention the cliffs. You were at the Cliffs of Moher over the last few days. The Cliffs of Moher are about 200 metres tall. What you're looking at in the distance there is just over 600 metres tall, and it's the same idea. It's a sheer drop straight into the ocean. Slieve League are some of the highest sea cliffs in Europe. Okay, that's the Atlantic Ocean out there in the distance between us and those mountains. Just the very tips of it has gone brown. The rest of it is still black. So the sun just bleached her wool a little bit. Okay, it's still black. As well as not knowing my sheep from anybody else's, Bob can't count. Okay, so he does need my help for this little bit. We'll try and make a break in the sheep. Bob, you'll notice by my movements and his, we'll try and get them to spread out. We'll try and bring 3 up here. Stay there. Come by. Come. Stay there. Wait, stay there. Come and stay there. Wait. Stay there. Wait, stay there. Come on. Stay there, that'll leave. Stay there. We're down to 3. Wait, stay there. We're down to 2. Okay. So it's easier and quicker for me to do it like that than working with hundreds and hundreds of sheep all at one time. Sometimes then we need to do the complete opposite of that. Wait, up. If I'm gathering the sheep on the mountain, it can take 1 full day to gather all of the sheep. That means if we forget any sheep, it can take another full day to go back and get the rest. Okay, we try and avoid that if at all possible. Wait, here. You can see Bob is completely intent on looking at these two sheep. Come by. Okay, so if I'm on the mountain gathering a full flock of sheep, and I can see more sheep behind the dogs, if they're coming towards me with the flock, and I can see more behind them that they've missed or they haven't gathered, instead of letting them come all the way to the bottom of the mountain with the sheep they have, and having to spend another day going right back to the top again, we try and teach the dog to look around them to see if they can see more sheep. Okay? And once he hears that word is look. So once he hears the word look, he'll turn around, go in the opposite direction, find whatever sheep are behind him, and he'll end up bringing them all right back up here beside me. And that one little thing of asking him to look around like that can save a full day's work on the side of a mountain. Deep into this little pen. Here. Wait. Up. Come back. Stay there. Up. Stay there. Come back. Wait. Come back. Get it. Wait. Get it. We don't start training them till they're about 18 months. So they have a little bit of time to mature and learn. And then when we start training them, they're very like us. Some will learn everything you've seen there within a matter of 3 or 4 weeks. Some, like us, can take that little bit longer to learn. It could take 8 or 9 months. And some, like us, never learn. Some want to work all day. Some will want to work half days. Some will want to work for an hour a day. Some will want to work for no hour any day. They're all just completely different. So we just produce these female lambs to go on to other farms to produce lambs on there. So we produce breeding stock here for other farms. No, we just can't do it. That's well over 100 years old now. Okay. As time moved on, I can remember walking around the mountain with a big bucket of paint, and Dad chose red, so we used to dip it in the red paint and stamp it onto the side of each sheep. And if you remember towards the beginning, I freely admitted that I'm lazy, so we just use aerosol cans. Okay, it's easier to carry around the mountain. We just renew it every time we come in contact with the sheep, just so that we know whose they are.
Donegal, Ireland features a charming harbour and stoic stone remains of centuries past, like the 15th century Donegal Abbey and the Donegal Castle, reminiscent of Gaelic glory. Our next stop was Derry, otherwise known as Londonderry, of Northern Ireland, which is British owned. We toured this ancient city which retains its medieval walls with original cannons. This part of Ireland is where most of the conflict occurred in the 1900s. We drove by several wall murals that honored patriots who had died during the fighting. We viewed monuments, painted billboards, and the Wall of Peace, which really says nothing about peace. During our walking tour, we passed by the city courthouse and heard on the news later that same evening that about an hour after we ended our tour, that a car bomb was set off in front of the courthouse. Obviously, there were still dissidents among the locals against the British. This may have had something to do with England wanting to pull out of the European Union. On our last day, we drove past several castles, each with its unique story and history rich in the fairy-tale Irish lore. I was amazed at how the Irish held to these fairy tales that dated back to pagan times. Shortly down the road from that castle, we came upon the Giant's Causeway. The name itself comes from mythology about two giants, one from Ireland and one from Scotland. They challenged each other to a fight, and one had to build a causeway to bridge the two islands, Scotland and Ireland. There is a large stone at this location that locals fondly call the Boot of the Giant. These enormous hexagonal columns were formed by a volcanic activity over 60 million years ago. These columns are beautiful and interesting. They have been declared as UNESCO World Heritage Site. In Belfast, we stopped at the birthplace of the Titanic and learned about the ill-fated ship through state-of-the-art displays. We viewed turn-of-the-century footage on large screens to help the museum goers to enter into the time period in which the ship was built, with trolley cars and women in tight corseted dresses walking the streets. The museum did a great job at visually describing the scale of the ship inside.
I was in the engine works for a while. Very well equipped it was. That's where we built the triple expansion engines. 2 of them, each as high as a 3-story house.
They even had a tram that trailed you through what would have been the ship's bowels, as it would have been during the build. It was an interesting experience with the sounds of hammers and other tools clanging against the iron. This really brought the experience to life. The actual footage of what went on during the build was state-of-the-art at its time.
You only had candles for a night. And the constant hammering against...
The final display is of the Titanic today, sitting 2 miles below the North Atlantic Ocean, loaded with iron icicles, lots of debris, remnants of the past, and of people's lives gone. Outside we walked the docks, where the famous liner was built just over a century ago. Today it is a vacant and stark reminder of the empty sadness of loss. This memorial is a reminder for all the people who lost their lives on the Titanic.
Well, the little boats are gone from the breast of Andalusia, and the ferry minutes stranded on the quay. Oh, rush in the back of a hundred, oh, rush in the back of a hundred, oh, rush in the back of a hundred. It's a round. Well, I'm a party, come from a warty. I got money and acres of land. I'm looking for a honey with a little bit of money. That's if you can, your name is dance on your mind. Back away from my money to me. Oh, tiny the pipes are calling.